What is going on, everybody? John Middlekauff, 3 and Out Podcast. Subscribe to the page. Subscribe to the podcast. You guys know the drill. If you're listening live on AMP, glad to have you. Make sure you listen to all of our content live every single week. A lot of football talk coming up. Very excited. But this weekend, I found myself watching a lot of baseball. I watched the Yankees. I was like, is Aaron Judge going to hit 70 home runs? He's already got 2. He's only played 3 games. No, I want to go to a Yankee game. If I lived in New York, do you know what I would do? I would download the Gametime app, the official ticketing partner of this podcast. I type in the promo code JOHN, John, and I get $20 off. And I would go watch Aaron Judge probably hit a home run, because that's usually what Aaron Judge does. If you're listening to this and you want to go to a baseball game, they only last 2.5 hours. You're in, you're out. Enjoy a little vitamin D, have a couple pops, enjoy yourself, and do it on me. These inflationary times, I got your back, saving you $20. Promo code JOHN, download the Gametime app, fastest growing ticket app in America. Promo code JOHN, $20 off. Don't even need to thank me. Just use the promo code. And because you guys have, they're the official ticketing app of this podcast. We appreciate you guys. They appreciate you guys. Do it on me. Concerts, comedy shows. I got you. Promo code JOHN. A lot of football stuff going on right now. We got the draft, basically 3.5 weeks away. I would imagine most NFL teams are, finalizing their draft board, right? The grades were well established months ago, but this is the time of the year when, it's probably changed a little with Zoom and Google Meets. You never want to leave out Google Meets. They might want to sponsor the show. I heard Google's got a lot of cash, even though I did see that Google is cutting expenses. They're getting rid of staplers. That'll probably save them some money. But, the draft is a time where, for those that work, the college scouts, the general managers, they do this year round. In the summer, they are watching the guys that are going to play in the fall. And then when those guys play in the fall, they watch all their snaps. And then in the off season, they go to all the all-star games, the combines. And it's a constant kind of, addition of information. And they say it's a process. It's a big, puzzle. You're putting the pieces together. You're gathering information. And you're trying to make an educated guess of if the guy's going to be a really good pro, what round would we take him? You're factoring in all these different variables. And I've loved the draft since I was a kid. I would imagine many people listening to this love the draft. It's a unique part of the sport. You get to add young players who are really cheap and who ultimately become stars, right? The greatest player in the league, in the history of the league, we could debate this, but the most accomplished player was pick 199. And so just because you're taking the first round, we all are fans of teams that have drafted guys in the first round that haven't become players. So right now, depending on the operation, a lot of teams involve their coaches heavily. Some teams are more a front office-led operation. Some teams involve their coordinators. It's hard because just like a lot of scouts don't know scheme, a lot of coaches aren't great talent evaluators. So there's a balance of knowing your own operation internally, who's good at evaluating, who's not good at evaluating. Just because you're not good at evaluating, if you're a linebacker coach or a running back coach, doesn't mean you don't have a strong opinion on who you want the team to draft. Now, if your coach is the ultimate decision maker, maybe you can get in his ear. If the GM is, he can push back. A lot of push and pull right now. A lot of both sides are trying to figure it out. And let's face it, like I've talked to enough people, this is not a great draft. I've talked to several older scouts and executives that thinks this is one of the worst drafts since they can remember. That doesn't mean that really good players are not going to come out of this. This doesn't mean we might not look back in 3 or 4 years and star players are littered in this draft. But based on the college film and these guys' measurable/production, it's not viewed as some star-studded operation. I was lucky enough my first year in the NFL to be the guy that went, and this was before the NFL took the draft to different cities. It was just at Radio City Music Hall. And I went, and my job was to sit there and talk to the team, right? So Howie or whoever the point guy was would call me on the phone, or you'd press a button. I forget exactly how it worked. And I'd write down the name. And it was a draft we took Danny Watkins. But that draft was incredible. Cam Newton, J.J. Watt, Von Miller, A.J. Green, Julio Jones, Aldon Smith. It was loaded. I mean, it was star-studded. And the draft, like on draft night, there is never a moment when someone's picked and they show the war room and those people aren't happy, especially in the first round. So most teams, when you pull the trigger on a player, you think the guy's going to be really good. Now, the thing with football, more than these other sports, there are so many variables. It's the most scheme-oriented sport. I would say it's definitely the sport that requires the most intellectual capacity on that individual sport. You have to learn positional, requirements for your team, and then scheme requirements for the entire offense or defense. You constantly have coaching turnover. There are just a lot of things that are hard to quantify. That's why this process and this date, given the draft every single year, we have hits and misses. And we have things that at the time feel like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy fell. And then 3 years later, no one's even talking about that. And vice versa, especially in a sport that is so physically demanding that these injuries and things that people don't know about, that teams have red flagged behind the scenes, come into play. And right now you'll read and hear a lot about top 30 visits. And what that is every team in the league gets 30 players that they can bring into their facility for like 24 hours. And part of that is you take the guy to dinner, you get to spend time with the owner, the coordinator, the head coach, the position coaches. You get to ask them some questions about things that maybe you don't know about or have questions about with their past, or maybe you're just simply trying to get to know the player better. And I think you got to be careful with this, because I'll never forget when my first or second year, Bobby Wagner was coming out, and he was, pretty highly touted prospect, was going to go probably in the top, 75 picks. Really productive player from Utah State, which, not some powerhouse program, though at the time they were actually producing a lot of NFL players. And I'll never forget, he wore a Ninja Turtle backpack. And I would imagine, because I know I did, thought like, that's kind of weird. Not that I was in position to draft him or not, but it turned on to have like a borderline Hall of Fame career. And I just think sometimes in these visits, and he was not like no one questioned his character or anything, but a lot of times these character guys show up in a full suit. To me, that was always like, well, something's a little off here. And I'll never forget, there were two guys one time, my first year, I did a lot of like picking them up from the airport and taking them to the facility. And then when they'd leave, I'd take them back to the airport. And I remember there was a group of two players that got into the car with me, and neither of them went on to have really long careers, but both of them had some red flags off the field. It was why we were bringing them in, Howie, Andy, whoever, to meet with them. And they just started talking about things that they would never say in front of the GM, in front of the coordinator, in front of any of the coaches, in front of anyone that they thought might impact their status. And one of my jobs was kind of report everything I heard. And I remember going right back. I don't know how much interest at the time we had, but it definitely wasn't a flattering thing that I reported back. And that's what this whole time is. So when you read that Will Levis is meeting with the Raiders, or so-and-so player is meeting with the Vikings, it's an information gathering time. And some players, it's not even about character at all. It's just getting to know you more as a football player. Getting to know, for Will Levis, when he meets with these teams, I think teams are going to want to know, what is your football intelligence? Like, what if I give you a playbook the week before you're coming to meet me, and then when you get here, I sit you down with my coordinator, my head coach, my position coach, and we start drilling you on 10 things that I told you to keep an eye on or read about in that playbook. Can you reiterate those things back to me? Do you know what's going on? Because I remember a famous story. I think Mahomes told this to the Kelsey brothers on their podcast, that Matt Nagy gave him the answers to the test because he liked him so much. So when he came on his visit, they kind of did some of that, and Mahomes had already been tipped off of what they were going to look for. But that's just kind of what's going on right now. Getting to know people, anyone with character questions, you're definitely digging into. I would say a lot of first-round picks. I would imagine, I know in my experience, Jeffrey Lurie always met with high-valued picks. He talked to him. Again, it might not even be about that serious, just getting to meet somebody. When you're thinking about drafting a player really high, the owner probably wants to talk to him. And so when I saw the story today that Jalen Carter, who, and I give this guy a lot of credit, he's clearly one of the great agents in the history of sports. His success speaks for itself. He's a unique personality who knows what he's doing. But a story today I saw, Drew Rosenhaus is not letting teams outside of the top 10 get visits with Jalen Carter. And that's pretty abnormal, I would say, in the NFL. Like in basketball and baseball, you often hear about these agents withholding information because, those are kind of player-run, agent-run operations. Listen, I grew up around Sacramento. The Kings, who just made the playoffs, and now the longest playoff active or missing the playoff streak belongs to the Jets. So the Kings just snapped a long streak. But for a long period of time, they were viewed, and rightfully so, as one of the most dysfunctional teams in all of sports. And so many agents would withhold information, would tell them, do not draft my player. That doesn't really happen in the NFL. It's very, very few and far between. Happens in baseball where teams, or a kid coming out of college or high school withhold medical information for major league teams. I get it. That's just not the way the NFL operates. Now, Jalen Carter's unique, right? He is viewed as arguably the best player in this draft, but because of some off-the-field questions, which are very valid, he could slip. So I saw a quote from Drew Rosenhaus, who views this guy as a lock top 10 pick. And I understand, I'm not going to send him some team that's drafted 19. It's a waste of my time. And typically, teams that are drafting late don't even request, on a year, let's just pick a sweet player, like a Myles Garrett or a Nick Bosa. Those guys aren't going to meet with the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Baltimore Ravens. But those teams wouldn't even ask to meet with that player just because it's a waste of everyone's time. In this case, I do understand teams in 12 to 20 going, hey, can we get this guy on a top 30 visit? Because there is a chance that this guy falls in the draft. And ultimately, and listen, Drew's been doing this longer than I have, but if he does fall in the draft, you do want him to go as quickly as possible. And for those teams to become more comfortable with this player, I don't think getting to know him is the worst thing. Because, I don't know, depending on who you talk to, I think people would argue this guy's got fall potential. And I remember thinking this about Mac Jones. I'm like, if the 49ers don't take him at 3, who's going to take him? And if it wasn't for Bill Belichick, Mac Jones was headed to the 20s. That was more of a talent thing. His talent was really overhyped. And look at it now. And this gets back to, there is no such thing as a guy with a super high floor. Mac Jones, Bill Belichick wouldn't even name him the starting quarterback at the owners' meetings. Wouldn't say it. Refused. Just now, that's maybe he's going a little old school. Mac Jones, not like he's proven anything, but usually by your third year, you're just either the lock starter or you're not. And Mac Jones isn't. Jalen Carter, if Jalen Carter and everyone that I've talked to in the NFL has acknowledged, if this guy's focused and he tries hard, he's a really good player. But then I had one scout tell me, listen, Georgia could have won the national championship if Jalen Carter did not play a game. They could not have won the national championship if Stetson Bennett had not played. So you start nitpicking these guys, these teams go, it's just, you can just talk yourself into and out of a lot of things this time of year. So interesting tactic by Jalen Carter. And just when you see all these guys making these visits, teams get 30. You get to just spend, 24 hours with the guy in your home base where you're comfortable, where you know the drill, where you can dictate the terms. I also saw the Indianapolis Colts. They chose to not really be that present at a lot of the big pro days for the quarterbacks. Instead, they are going to privately work out CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. They're going to send, their quarterback coach, their offensive coordinator, obviously their head coach, I'm sure is their offensive coordinator. And they are going to, I'm sure Chris Ballard probably be there as a contingent, work the guy out. So, every team approaches this a little bit differently. I do think in the internet age, it's harder to hide things. it used to probably be more in vogue, 15, 20 years ago, that you kind of played mind games, cloak and dagger of like you bring in a guy that you didn't really want. I don't know if you have the time now. So I think if you're bringing in a guy, you have interest in him. And yeah, this is just a really fun time of year. It's lying season. Not that far away from guys actually being on teams. A couple other things in football. It feels like the Washington Commanders, by all reports, are going to sell for $6 billion. And one thing that fascinates me as someone who's, been looking to buy a home now for a year and inevitably is going to buy a home on a street that is a lot more expensive than the other homes on the street. Not necessarily because the home is that much different, just because it's 2023. And another guy on that street might have bought that home in 2003. So if that guy pays $500,000, I might have to pay $1.9 million. And his home currently, if he wanted to sell, would be worth a lot of money too. But that's not how I view it. He got it for that amount of money. And I'm fascinated by some of these owners. There's a lot of owners in the NFL that have gotten teams, hell, just because their parents bought it once upon a time, right? They inherited the franchise, which I'm not here to like tell you they shouldn't own it. That's welcome to the reality of life. Now, a lot of their their parents, their dads, bought that franchise for not that much money. And I'm always fascinated by a money dynamic once the money gets really, really big, right? Like if you bought a home on a street, let's just say for $10 million, and there were other homes on that street where the people bought it for $100,000, there might be some tension when it came to the HOA rights, right? Just natural. You view yourself, right or wrong, like having more skin in the game, right? And you also made those people a lot of money by just buying that piece of property on the same street that guy lives. So if the Commanders sell for $6 billion, we just saw Tepper buy a team for whatever, $4 billion. We saw the Denver Broncos sell for whatever, $4.5, $5 billion. Some of these teams are being purchased at, just the going rate for astronomical numbers. Yet there are so many people in the league that once upon a time bought their team for 100, 200, $300 million. So right now, the one thing that the NFL has had, I would say pretty consistent, is they've been on the same page as a group. They've argued at times, right? But for the most part, they've used well as a unit. So for this Thursday night argument a couple weeks ago, I guess it was last week, a lot of people were like, why are we trying to flex these Thursday night games? And I read an article where Dave Tepper stood up and like, did Amazon say something? Like, why is this even an issue? And it's clearly just an issue because they used to have 20 million people watch Thursday night games, and last year they had about 10. So they want more people to watch. Now, part of it is just a natural change where you're going to streaming only is going to be pretty extreme. But the point is the amount of money that's on the line and the amount of money that's being spent by the partners, some of these new owners, is just a lot different than some of the money that, hell, Jerry Jones once upon a time bought the team in 1989. Now, he thinks like these big money guys, and he now is a big money guy, but not every owner is just flush with cash. So one thing I've always, at least the show has talked about, that NFL's not staying on top forever. That's not going to happen. They're not just going to be the behemoths in perpetuity. And it's like, well, I don't see any other sport catching them in terms of interest. Maybe the downfall inevitably is just, what if some of the owners start internally fighting? And anytime you get a huge wealth gap, not because the teams don't have money, this is not baseball, every team can pay the player, but the way owners feel that they're more important because they paid more for the team, it's just something that I'm pretty fascinated with. Because I just saw Florio was writing about on Pro Football Talk that the escrow rule in the NFL, if I sign you to a guaranteed contract, within 12 months of signing that contract, I have to put a substantial amount into escrow. It's kind of an archaic way that the NFL does their funding. Well, technically the Browns on March 31st owed the league $169 million for the escrow payment for Deshaun Watson. Now, they declined whether that was put in there, but just shows you. I mean, we are in different times with the league that I know, I grew up with. Odell Beckham Jr. It was originally reported that he wanted $20 million, which was insane. And it has since been rescinded to $15 million, which I also find somewhat laughable in a vacuum. He's not a $15 million player, given his production and given that he has 2 ACL tears in the last 40 months. Now, I think we all can relate to this at just a different price point. Once you start doing something you like or start making a lot of money, for someone to change your lifestyle or get you to do something you don't want to do, they usually have to pay a lot of money, right? Or get to an amount of money that, listen, I'm going to throw a number out there. You're probably not going to match. I'm not even that interested. And that happens sometimes. And I started thinking, Odell has made a lot on the field. He's also made a lot off the field, made a ton of money. Are we sure Odell, is willing to play for $3 or $4 million? Because to me, that's kind of his going rate. It's like a $3 or $4 million player, given that he's got multiple injuries. And when you look at his production, he's got 7 touchdowns since 2019, right? Part of the problem right now with DeAndre Hopkins, he makes $19 million. He averaged a career low in 2022 for yards per catch. He obviously was suspended for some PED issues. The money doesn't really add up for the production and some of the red flags and some of the trends. It's why you can request a trade all you want. No one's trading for you at that price point. That's why Odell Beckham can ask for $15 million. Don't blame him because his life's great. He's already worth a ton, but he's not a $15 million player. And I don't see anyone, especially currently, going to crack at the $15 million number. Now, maybe if we get into training camp and a guy tears an ACL or an Achilles, a team is desperate and someone gives them $8 to $10 million. But I will be stunned, given his age, given his limited past production over a 3 or 4 year span, and given his injuries, if he gets a big time contract. Don't blame him at all for asking for a bigger number, but it just doesn't add up. So I think you have to ask yourself, does he really want to play that much? Is this life or death? And when I say life or death, I don't actually mean life or death. I just mean, does football mean everything to the guy anymore? I don't know. I mean, it might not, and I think it's very, very, he's a bizarre player because his peak, he was really, really special. The Giants fans know his speed was elite. He was so dynamic with the ball in his hands. He was so unreal as a punt returner. I mean, the dude was a legitimate star. But then the moment he got paid / he got traded to the Browns, his injuries, it ain't the same. This is 2023. It's not 2015. And I just wonder if where we're headed with Odell is maybe he's not headed to an NFL team anytime soon, and it's just going to be when his number comes way down. Or maybe somehow he backs into some guys get hurt and he gets way more than, I think he's worth, but way less than his $15 million number. Hard Knocks. They are down to 4 teams because to be eligible for Hard Knocks, you can't have a new coach and you can't have made the playoffs in the last 2 years. So the Patriots, for example, they don't have a coaching change, but they made the playoffs in 2021. So they are exempt. So the teams we're looking at are the Saints, the Bears, and the New York Jets. And the Bears have been pretty adamant. They want no part of it. To me, the Saints would be a little boring. I think the Jets are, honestly, if you just, once Aaron Rodgers is traded to the Jets, if you just had to do a draft of what teams would you want to see on Hard Knocks, I don't see how the Jets wouldn't be near the top. Honestly, they feel like a lock. Big market, star quarterback, who's polarizing, and a really talented team. And a coach. Because to me, you need a star player and you need a head coach with some personality. The Commanders are another team, right? They would make, actually, they're not. Commanders? No. No Commanders. I'm confused. I thought there were 4 teams, but I only named 3. Maybe it is the Commanders. Did they make the playoffs 2 years ago? Or was that 3 years ago? I think it was 3 years ago. And I think the Jets just end up being on Hard Knocks. I mean, they make too much sense. You got Robert Saleh, good looking, big personality. He can carry you. Aaron Rodgers content can carry you. And let's face it, and I've been saying this for a while, Hard Knocks is kind of a thing of the past. It's kind of boring. We don't get the inside view of the GM and the head coach talking about, the 53-man roster, who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. It feels like it's run by the league in terms of no one wants to hurt anyone's feelings. And I get why. If I was a team and I was in charge of a team, I wouldn't want to hurt anyone's feelings either. But that was a huge reason that Hard Knocks really shot out like a rocket ship when I was like in high school and college, because it was so raw and real. It was reality television, like legitimately. You would get those personnel meetings where they were like ranking guys, who was going to get cut, who might not make it, what draft pick sucked. And those days feel like a thing of the past. The Lions had its moments, but even that, it's a little cheesier now. So at least with the Aaron Rodgers drama alone, I think it could carry Hard Knocks at minimum for a couple episodes.